In this video, I'll break down the entire tournament of how I won the Secrets of Power limited planetary qualifier that took place in Seattle last weekend, including video of the draft. Welcome to Channel SWU. My name is Jared and I am now a planetary qualifier champion. This means I will participate in the Galactic Championship in Las Vegas this July, and I wanted to show you exactly how it all went down and hopefully give you some insight to make you a stronger player. Please subscribe to help show your support, like the video, and leave a comment with any of your thoughts down below. The PQ event was the limited format with 6 rounds of sealed and the top 8 then having a single elimination draft. For those of you unfamiliar with what limited is, it means that nobody showed up with a deck to play. We started with sealed, where you are given 6 booster packs. Open them all up, and those 84 cards is your entire pool to build a deck out of. It also means that you are limited to whatever leaders you opened up. You are able to pick any of the common bases from the set provided for free, but you must use one of your opened leaders. After opening up all of your boosters, you then build a 30-card deck from what you have available. Whenever I go into a tournament like this, I try to set some reasonable, attainable personal goals. If the goal is always just, I want to win the whole thing, well, of course we all do, but when that goal isn't hit, it feels bad. Instead, I told myself that my goals are take better notes and be more conscientious of what my opponents could play as we get into the higher resource turns. And I wanted to spend extra time during deck building to explore all my options for the sealed portion. My tournament day started out pretty well, frankly. I opened up my leaders and I got 2 Mon Mothma, Jabba the Hutt, DJ, Sly Moore, and a showcase Dryden Voss. So if nothing else, at a minimum, I got a showcase for my efforts that day. I thought my deck building was going to be an easy, surefire thing. The general consensus is that the best leaders you can play are Leia Organa, Jabba, and Colonel Yularen. And I have Jabba, plus some of the best cards you could hope to have with them. So naturally, I put together what I felt was the best Jabba green deck I could make, and immediately noticed its major flaw. And you can probably see it too. Here is the exact deck. Some of the best Jabba cards are all in here. Cantwell Arrestor Cruiser, Condemn, Dogmatic Shock Squad, Naboo Security Force, Gonk Power Droid, Cruel Commandos, Death Trooper. This is close to being a drafted Jabba green deck, but you can see the problem. I have exactly 5 turn 1 plays. That is horrendously low. When I build my limited decks, either sealed or draft, I aim to have about 8 turn 1 plays that cost 2 resources or less. I go for 6 at a minimum, and this build has 5, with every possible green, blue, villainy, and neutral card I had in my pool. This build has some of my favorite cards to play. Cantwell Arrestor Cruiser is easily my favorite card in the set, but I needed to consider all of my options. So I removed all of the blue and then put in all my playable aggression cards. Here's what that build looked like. This is arguably much more solid. Great turn 1 plays, solid curve out with a bit of top end finishers. This would be a fantastic Colonel Yularen deck. However, I didn't open a Colonel Yularen. My only villainy green or red option in my entire pool was the showcase Dryden Voss. If I played this red-green build, it's more aggressive, sure, but then I have a leader that doesn't deploy until turn 7, meaning it's going to be harder to get that early damage push. And I don't have a ton of units that cost 6 or more to utilize his leader ability with. To be thorough, I also explored what a red-yellow Sly Moore deck would look like, but my yellow pool was far too shallow. I think that one only had something like 19 units with everything put in, and I aim to have about 25 units in my sealed deck builds. So I'm met with a conundrum. A risky Jabba green deck that could easily fall behind in the early game against aggressive decks, or a solid red-green Dryden deck that's more aggressive, but with a very slow leader that may not show up in time. I had a decision to make. I'll include links to both decks in the description down below so you can take a look and let me know what you think you would have done. Thankfully, I had experience playing this format in sealed, both in locals and in the PQ scene. What I've observed is people trying to make Jabba and Leia decks work, as they're considered to be the best, with you learn red as a backup if those don't work out. If Jabba and Leia decks are the most prominent, that means those games will typically go longer, and if that's the case, my Jabba build looks great for it. I registered my main deck as Jabba Green, but I kept the Dryden Red build sleeved up so that I could swap to that in case I find myself struggling to keep up against a hyper-aggressive opponent. Looking at the Jabba deck again, there are some key cards I'm playing. I basically have 3 win conditions: the Cantwell Arrestor Cruiser, the First Light, and an out-of-aspect Jade Squadron Patrol as beefy space threats to close things out. It's difficult to interact in space, and those 3 can easily deal big, unanswered damage to the opponent's base. There's also plenty of solid ground units that can get in there too, such as the Raxian Assembly and the FN Trooper Corps, with enough Sentinels to slow my opponents down. I know that the Cantwell has a steep disclose cost, and I wanted to reliably be able to play it when I needed it. When a card asks for 2 of a single aspect, I aim for a minimum of 15 of that color in the entire deck. A good way to help that disclose cost is to have more cards in hand, which plot cards help with. I had Unveiled Might and the FN Trooper Corps giving me excellent plot options on Jabba's flip turn, which essentially kept an extra card in my hand. Bardotan Ornithopter could also draw me an extra card. But I also wanted to keep my blue count high in the deck. Defense Fleet X-Wing is not a very good card, and I never actually played it. But it is another Vigilance card, and it could be a clutch Sentinel against something like a Slymore space deck. It's also why Jade Squadron Patrol is included. It's a big, efficient unit, even when costing 8 out of aspect, and it also gave me 1 more blue in the deck for those disclose costs. This put my Vigilance count total at 13. That is lower than I would like, so I would make intentional resource decisions to try to keep more blue cards in my hand than usual. Creditors claim I had not really played with before, and I found it to be surprisingly good. The +2/+2 stat line was very relevant and even helps Jabba's triggered ability. I was able to use it to take down 2 units at once a few times, and it was a blue villainy card that I could disclose for Condemn and Cantwell Arrestor Cruiser. I did make a deck building mistake. That Political Bully does close to nothing. My deck only had 5 officials it could trigger off of, and they all cost more than the Political Bully. I think I only got to do the 2 damage thing once throughout the entire day. Instead, I had an Inspiring Senator in the sideboard that I should have registered instead. It's a 3/3 instead of a 2/3, and if it died, maybe it would let me get down something like Raxian Assembly a turn early. Round 1 seedings get called, and I'm still feeling nervous about Jabba's risky early game, knowing that I'm gonna have to mulligan pretty frequently. However, I am much more comfortable playing Jabba as a leader than any other leader in the format. I have the most experience with him, and his gameplay style matches my preference so much more, so I felt confident I could play him well. I just didn't want to get overrun. My round 1 opponent was on Luthen Rail Green. I immediately felt better about my chances. While Luthen is an aggressive leader, he usually can't quite push damage hard and fast enough to overwhelm me, since he only has 2 power when he deploys. When some of the opening plays that my opponent does is the 2/2 hidden rebel unit, my hand kept looking better and better. Sure enough, my ground control game with Sentinels and Jabba pings were too much, and I take down the first match in 2 games. Round 2 was a similar story. My opponent, who is one of the store managers participating in the event, was playing Cassian Andor Green. Same story, just not aggressive enough on his end that my lack of early game was very punishing. He did swap to Luthen Rail for games 2 and 3, which went better for him as he was able to play 2 Shadow Crawlers, Alexander Callus, and a Queen Amidala. Thankfully, I stabilized and took over game 3 for another victory. With 2 rounds done, this is where we start to see the better decks rise up. My round 3 opponent is on Leia Organa Red, and I feel the immediate uh-oh as this could be the kind of curve out that I can't keep up with. And that's exactly how the first game felt. Even with a mulligan, I missed a turn 1 play and had nothing to play on 4 resources. He already had a space unit and a ground unit getting damage to my base. I already felt defeated until, with my Jabba the Hutt deployed, he attacked his unit into my FN Trooper Corps, but my troopers survived, allowing me to use Jabba's ability to send that damage and defeat his space unit. He scoffed at himself and said, "Oh right, Jabba can use that ability defensively too." That one mistake completely turned the tide in my favor, letting me follow up with Naboo Security Force and the Cantwell Cruiser to win the first game. Game 2 was also a long, grindy match. At the end, I had 28 base damage and he was at 23. We were both down to the literal last cards of our deck. He has me dead in one more action. I could claim the initiative and attack for 5 as my first action, which would not be enough to win and I would lose on the crackback. However, he played Bardotan Ornithopter that game, disclosed, and drew an extra card off of it. So into the final turn, I drew my last 2 cards and he drew his last 1, meaning he took 3 base damage from not being able to draw a second card, giving me just enough to deal the final blow. So now I'm 3-0. If I win the next match, I can intentionally draw the last 2 rounds and guarantee a place in the top 8. I kept my nerves calm, reminded myself to just take it 1 game at a time and don't worry about the implications. My round 4 opponent is also on Leia Red. I thought, that's fine, I did it before, I can do it again. This Leia was even more aggressive. Fast curve outs with Warrior of Clan Ordos and an experience counter and a contraband starfighter. It was the exact matchup I feared, and I got quickly destroyed. I had a plan though, and I stuck with it. Game 2, I swapped the deck to Dryden Voss Red. It went all according to plan. I had 7 base damage on myself by the time I won the game before his Leia even really got to deploy and get going. I out-aggroed him. So I stuck with Dryden Voss going into game 3, and the initiative really mattered here. My opener was Gonk Power Droid, and his opener was Warrior of Clan Ordo. He grabbed that early momentum and I couldn't turn it around, so it let Leia get the win against me. A loss is a bummer, but I'm not out of it yet. I only need 1 more win to get that top 8. Match 5, Colonel Yularen Red. Another aggressive deck that I worried about falling behind against. Game 1 was a tight race. I was at 27 base damage and was able to win it. Game 2 was not even close and definitely in his favor. However, in both games, I didn't feel wholly overwhelmed like I feared. I made the decision to stick with Jabba Green throughout the match instead of swapping to Dryden. My endgame plays were just better than his. Game 3, we're slugging back and forth. I'm at 13 base damage and he's at 27. And time is called in the round. I could tell my opponent knew he had no way of winning. His best hope was to drag it out into a draw. And that's exactly what he did. Disrupted my units just enough with sentinels and interactions so that I could not get the last 3 damage in. We draw. 3-1-1 is a scary record to have. I have to win the next match, and I need to have good tiebreakers to hope to make top 8. Final match of the day, round 6, and it's a mirror match. Not just also on Jabba Green, but also playing a lot of the same cards that I am. We're both plotting out FN Trooper Corps, we're both playing Naboo Security Force, we both played Jade Squadron Patrol out of Aspect. It was a very intricate, meticulous matchup with so many micro decisions with both of our Jabba abilities. Truthfully, it was the most fun match of the whole day because of how much careful maneuvering we had to both do. I was able to win the first game and we grinded it out to the second game with a surprisingly familiar ending. I had him at 27 base damage and I was at 21. Earlier, He had played a Bardottan Ornithopter and drew an extra card. We got down to the final cards of our decks. I drew my last two. He could only draw his last one. I defeated an opponent by making them take decked out base damage. His buddy was even watching him, and as he drew that last card, he even laughed and said, "Oh, what, you didn't see that coming?" So my final Swiss record for the day was 4-1-1. Thankfully, because I had such a strong start, it also meant that my tiebreakers were excellent, a full 5 percentage points higher than the next closest person. That let me take 8th place overall, and I made it to the draft. During the sealed event, I'd say the card that surprised me the most was the First Light. It frequently had a target to hit, and I was almost always able to keep Jabba deployed, making the First Light's ambush a brutal 2-for-1 action. But if I had to give one card the MVP award, it would be my opponent's Bardottan Ornithopters for making them deck out for me. Earlier I talked about having goals for events like this. Another one of my goals was to have an overall positive record, which I accomplished. And even better, I made top 8. So no matter what, I got to draft, which is the best part. And I'll have at least some PQ points to my name. Making top 8 in a large competitive event like this is a feat all on its own. It's not easy, so I was satisfied that I'd even made it this far. And I love drafting. It's one of the most fun ways to play, and I was looking forward to this part. High competitive drafting. And thankfully, we have some snippets of video that I can share with you. We opened up our packs, and I looked at my 3 leaders: Mon Mothma, Cassian Andor, and Leia Organa. The choice here was a no-brainer, but I was looking at what was likely to be passed my way from the left. This is what the draft table looked like with the opened leaders. I figured the player to my left was going to take that Yularen, which means my second choice options are either C-3PO and Dedra. There was another 3PO to the left after that, and I knew that wasn't going to be picked. Thus, I knew taking Dedra was the best option I would have, at least as a villain leader, and then my third leader I ended up getting was the C-3PO. More importantly, I can now look to my right and have an idea of what is going to be passed to me in the draft packs. The player to my immediate right has a Jabba the Hutt, Cassian Andor, and the 3PO, meaning he's definitely going to try for that Jabba if he can help it. To the right of him, that player ended up with Bail Organa, Cassian Andor, and Luthen Rael. Then it's a likely Yularen and a likely Jabba. There's only one other Leia leader at the table, and it's on the opposite side. I'm in an excellent position to get good blue heroic cards passed to me. I'm already feeling confident about that part. I feel even better as we open our first packs, and I see my pack 1 pick 1, Coronet. One of the strongest uncommons you could hope for. An easy pick, even with several other solid choices available. Pick 2 was a really weak pack. I considered the C-3PO unit because that is essentially a 2-4 for 2 in a Leia deck, but I also figured he's more likely to make its way around the table and wheel back to me. Instead, I take the Republic Warwalker just for a little bit of extra power, and in the small scenario that I end up leaning towards red. Pick 3 was a little tough. There was a Cinta Kaz, which would go well with the Republic Warwalker pick I already have, and she is an amazing plot card with Leia. But looking to my right, with Yularen at the head of our side of the table, I don't want to commit to red that early. So instead, I take the Heroic Arc 170, another solid unit that will likely make the deck of any color with a little bit of interaction value. By the end of my first pack, it was much more clear what the drafters to my right were doing. I can predict what I think their most likely color pairs are going to be, and based on my prediction, what looked open to me was blue and yellow. I started taking yellow cards aggressively for the rest of pack 1, knowing that blue heroic cards should get passed over to me. I knew the deck I wanted to draft: Leia Space Aggro Yellow, Bravo Squadron, Jade Squadron Patrol, Senator Tucci, Remote Escort Tank, Bardottan Ornithopter, Accelerate Our Plans, A-Wing, all amazing cards to start off with. I thought yellow was going to be open for the entire table, with maybe the other Leia taking them. I was in a great table position. This is what my final draft pool looked like. Emergency Powers was a surprising pickup, as that was pack 3 pick 11, wheeling its way around to me, and I'm happy to play that off aspect. Notably, I did not see any Beguiles. There was like 5 bog downs, and I thought more of those would make their way back to me, and I ended up with 1. If I could make any changes, I would have gone after those A-Wings a little harder than I did, but I was still happy with a healthy amount of cheap units that I can get into space. I even had a couple of flexible sideboard cards should I need it. My deck has a concise plan. Play cheap 1 resource units on the first turn, use Leia to give them experience, and continue to build them up bigger than the opponent can deal with, especially if it's an A-Wing or a Zenuous Shadow Fighter dominating the space arena. My quarterfinals match is against a Jabba Green deck. Because this is the top 8 matches, we get to see the deck lists of our opponents before we start. Normally, we look at these and you see what their bombs are. What cards could they have that I should be worried about? That's not what I looked for, though. I was only looking for cards they could have that could stop me in space. He only had a couple. The Cantwell Cruiser, an Ornithopter, but more annoyingly, 1 Consular's Cruiser. Everything else was of no concern to me. Game 1 was a very clean start. I get that A-Wing down and pump it up. I could see my opponent react as I did that, already signaling to me that this is going to be a problem for him. He builds his ground arena presence with some underwhelming units. I keep going to space, and I'm already winning the damage race. Then there's the Coronet to help me stabilize, and that pesky Consular's Cruiser shows up. It's obnoxious, but I use my smaller units to clear it out, clearing the way for the Coronet to keep pushing base damage. I deploy Leia the next turn because I wanted to plot out the escort tank, seeing that none of his ground units could survive crashing into it as a sentinel. Even more fortunate to me, his Inspector Shuttle hit my Coronet, and that 4 damage went to the remote escort tank instead of finishing the Coronet. Then a nightmare response. Condemn onto Leia. Now she's basically worthless. Even though he's at 21 base damage, I could quickly lose this as he can defeat the Coronet and then I'm lacking on the ground. I considered using the Covert Operative to capture the Inspector Shuttle to protect the Coronet, but with Charged with Corruption being a possibility, I instead dropped Sonara San as a big 7/7 unit. My opponent pushes a bunch of base damage. Suddenly, I'm dead in 1 action. But as I mentioned, my deck had a plan. Boom! Accelerate our plans. Exhausting Leia and using Sonara to hit his base for 10 damage. I take the first game. Game 2 went way worse for me. I got trounced. And I think it's because I didn't mulligan. I had a very keepable opening hand, but it did not have any space units. I beefed up good ground units like the Chandrillian Sponsor and a Skyhopper, but that only gave Jabba targets to use his ability on me. I made sure to fix that mistake for Game 3, where a familiar A-Wing and Zenuous Shadow Fighter curve out and kept attacking. I held onto the Coronet to play that on 6 resources, letting me get more Leia ability activations when I play it that turn. A Cantwell Cruiser to stop 1 attacker isn't quite enough. A Leia deploy with the tank gives too many threats, and I win the quarterfinals match. The semifinals match is against Bail Organa Red Aggro. Game 1 I was able to win pretty quickly. Game 2 was a lot tighter, with a lot of damage being thrown back and forth. I had Coronet out, restoring me a lot of base damage. He had Figure of Unity on Bail, giving him a lot of restore and some extra damage. I tried to use a remote tank to slow some of that damage down, but he had a Rebel Pathfinder juiced up with sudden ferocity, and it's suddenly pretty threatening. Thankfully, I had 1 more attack with Senator Tucci, so I could restore just a little bit more, making him exactly 1 damage off of getting lethal, and I win the match in 2 games. I'm now at the finals. Much better than I could ever hope for. I would be happy with my performance if it ended right there. But I couldn't allow any mental bandwidth to anything like that. All that mattered was the next game. My final opponent is on Jabba Red, and we look over each other's deck lists. This was the drafter sitting directly to my right during the draft, and oh my god, is his deck absolutely cracked. 3 Dogmatic Shock Squads, 2 Hondo Anakas, 2 the Galleons, a Fulminatrix, Mirage Sintel, Dryden Boss Unit. By all measures, his deck was incredibly more powerful than mine. None of that mattered to me. I didn't care how strong any of those cards were. When I looked at his deck sheet, I wasn't looking for things that I needed to be scared of. I was only looking for things that could possibly stop me. And all I saw were expensive, slow spaceships and expensive ground units that won't hit hard enough or fast enough. I knew my plan. I learned from the quarterfinals against the Java Green player. I mulliganed hands that didn't have a turn 1 space unit. I was going to completely lane dodge and go full aggro. Game 1 was a massacre. Lots of space units constantly getting in. The only ground units I deployed was a Skyhopper that I refused to upgrade so that Jabba's ability would only send in 1 more damage to any of my other units. I kept him off of the initiative so that I could not get blasted by a Let's Call It War. I dropped the Jade Squadron Patrol. He responds with the Galleon and the Disclose to get all the spies in the world. And I take the initiative. Then, an Accelerator plans to blast into his base for 9 damage, gives me game number 1. Game 2 had some interesting points. I once again got to lead off with the A-Wing. He gets down Atreus Acolyte, and I get the experience counter onto the A-Wing. Going into the 3 resource turn, my opponent passes priority. I used Leia to give the A-Wing more experience. He passes again. I swing in for 4 damage to his base. He gives me another pass while he has all 3 resources up, and the Atreus Acolyte that is not attacked. I smell a Let's Call It War. So instead, I claim the initiative, essentially denying him his entire second turn. Plus, with the initiative, I can get an easy 4 more base damage with the A-Wing. He plays one of his few space units, the Enforcer Squadron, so I follow up with the Heroic Arc. Sure enough, the Let's Call It War lands. This let me use Catch Unawares to take out the squadron and keep my space threat and start rebuilding with the Zenuous Shadow Fighter. As we get to 6 resources, I know what to expect from him. A Dogmatic Shock Squad. Not a threat, and I have a measly 5 damage on my base. I drop the Jade Squadron Patrol. I have the initiative so that I can hit with that patrol right away for 6, bringing him up to 21 base damage. His only response is to play one of his 2 Galleons, disclosing cards to make a bunch of spies. And I finally get to play the Hyperfoil rare that hasn't been in my hand all night until now, Emergency Powers, with 4 extra resources to make my last space units lethal. With that fist bump, I became the PQ champion. The last match of the entire tournament was the easiest one that I played all night. My deck was designed to entirely dismantle Jabba the Hutt decks. Accelerator Plans was a card that I liked more and more as I use it, since I had a bit of a swarm tactic going on, making it into a surprise strike. Even Catch Unawares as a means to interact with another space unit profitably was better than expected. What helped me win the Planetary Qualifier Top 8, aside from having a streamlined deck with a clear, defined plan, was back during the draft process. I identified my seat very early on, saw the clear signals, and honed in on it. Prioritized cheap space units, cards that I could buff with Leia, and forcing my opponents to deal with my threats. I was not trying to find cards to react to theirs. I love limited play. I love sealed, I love draft, and I love playing Star Wars Unlimited. And now I have 100 qualifying points to my name. And I'll be playing in Galactics this July. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please subscribe for more Star Wars Unlimited content, especially videos on Limited. Please also like the video and leave a comment with your thoughts about deck building, your experiences, or anything else.